recruiters to do their thing. So we're going to move right on to the next speaker, Benjamin Phillips, who is the Chief Survey Methodologist at the Social Research Centre in Australia, where he applies best practices and develops new methods to reduce survey errors and costs, and works on Live in Australia, which is Australia's only probability-based online panel. Prior to joining the Social Research Centre, Dr. Phillips was a senior associate scientist at Abt Associates, and previously worked for Abt SRBI and Brandeis University. So the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Ari. Let me just quickly share my slides. So again, thank you. So yes, I'm Ben Phillips. I also want to acknowledge my co-authors, as well as senior methodological advisors, and Andrew Wood, our principal statistician. So Live in Australia is Australia's only probability-based online panel. So we run on a monthly cycle, doing one wave of surveys a month. Currently, we have up to 6,000 panel members completing surveys per wave. So, you know, like perhaps a lot of panels like Healthy NYC, we're mostly an online panel. In our case, we're including offline panel members via Catty, probably for many of the same reasons that Healthy NYC does. And they're only a small fraction of our panel membership, however. So this is a follow-up to a paper I gave last year, so looking at longer-term retention. So we established a panel in 2016 using dual frame RDD. We topped up in 2018 using mobile RDD and expanded in 2019 using address-based sampling. So we came up in 2020, we thought we could do the same thing and get the same result, but that wasn't what happened. So in order to make quota, we had to pivot to using interactive voice response and SMS. But we found that retention of panelists recruited via those modes wasn't terribly good. And we topped up again in 2021 using SMS in an attempt to trial ways to fight attrition. And the most recent expansion in late 2021 used ABS. So for IVR and SMS, just really quickly, so we've been running some internal developmental trials. We hadn't expected to be able to need to push it into practice so quickly. But that did allow us to pivot. Now, as to why IVR and SMS, well, we'd known that IVR had been used for the probit panel in Canada, and it appeared to work quite well for them. SMS push to web was a brainchild of my colleague, Dina Niger, who spoke yesterday, and had appeared to be uncharted ground, although we now know that it was being used trialed at the same time in Chile, and was also being used in New Hampshire, as I found out yesterday. So just to kind of take a look at, and I'm just collapsing the recruitment and profile rates together to kind of get an overall measure of the effectiveness of the recruitment. So altogether, we've gotten across various conditions, a 10.8% recruitment profile rate for the address-based sample in 2019. In 2020, so it was the relevant bit that we'd repeated, we'd had a 9% rate, and that had dropped quite markedly to 6.1%. IVR was we have very low recruitment profile rates, only 1.6%. SMS was better, but still quite a bit less than address-based sampling. We've seen a little bit of an uptick in SMS this year. It's unclear what's driving that because really everything we haven't changed any relevant settings on it. And the address-based sample, we had higher recruitment profile rates. Some of that is probably we didn't oversample low response rate areas as heavily as we did in the past. So that's some of it, but I don't think I can explain all of the improvement. There just seems to be a bit of a secular trend unrelated to things that we've done. So moving on, kind of looking at this, we were only some of the way across last time. We'd only really just released these, had just recruited these samples. So kind of looking at longer term trends. That initial picture has held up. We see retention rates being lowest for the SMS sample, IVR occupying a place in the middle, and ABS doing better. Since we retired panelists kind of along the same time as we brought in our new address-based sampling panelists, we've seen retention rates level off as we've, you know, those who were most likely to attract kind of were caught up seemingly in the retirements from the panel. So moving on now to completion rates. Again, we kind of see a very similar pattern here. So the lowest completion rates are with our SMS sample, IVR in a place in the middle, and ABS has the highest retention rates. And again, of course, we see a bit of a benefit from when we retired our inactive panel members, of course. So, so we've, as I mentioned, we did try and fix SMS retention and completion rates. We thought, all right, well, maybe it was kind of lack of a more tangible form of contact. Let's try a welcome call. Let's try mailing a welcome packet. Let's do both. No benefit, which left me a bit like feeling a bit like C3PO in the background of that screen capture there. So putting it all together in terms of cumulative response rates, this is where we end up. So naturally, our address-based sampling group, other than our long-time continuing panel members, have the highest overall cumulative response rates. SMS occupies a middle ground solely on the fact that we have greater yields from our recruitment efforts, and IVR, thanks to very low initial recruitment profile rates, goes along the bottom. So just to pivot now to having a look at demographics. So our panel is probably not unique to us, quite a bit older than the population at large. Address-based sampling really doesn't help that very much. It's also older than the population at large. The IVR sample is actually really close to the population norms. And SMS, kind of pretty much uniquely in my experience, actually delivers this a sample that is younger than the population at large, which of course is really good for our panel composition. Now you'll see that there's been a bit of, the 2020 and 2021 results are not identical. And you'll see a bit of this as I go through some other demographics. So moving on to gender in general, and again, I suspect we're far from alone with this. We're reasonably female heavy, underrepresent men. I did get quite excited at the balanced gender composition for the SMS sample from 2020, but we seem to have a bit of regression to the mean, and it's pretty much indistinguishable from the other modes based on the 2021 vintage. Moving on to education. So our panel is quite a bit, it overrepresents the most highly educated part of the population. I was perturbed by the particularly high level of representation of the people with bachelor's degree or above in 2020. But again, as we've seen in the couple of examples before, and we'll see in the one more I'm going to talk through, the 2021 SMS we've seen looking much more parallel to other sampling frames. All right, moving on. Finally, last one of the demographics I'll look at, country of birth. We do slightly overrepresent, but very, very slightly, the Australian born, but we do overrepresent those who've migrated from kind of the Anglosphere. And again, there's a sort of seems to be a bit of regression to the mean with the SMS sample. And again, I'd love to be able to give you a good explanation for this, but really, you know, our methods didn't vary. So part of it may be relatively small sample size that leaves us a bit vulnerable to wave-to-wave variation. All right, so this was basically just to answer a simple question. The lower completion and retention rates that we've seen due to the sample composition, which tends to be, heavy on young adults who tend to be among the fastest attritis, and the simple answer is no. The recruitment mode does exert an independent effect, even when you control for the kitchen sink, as I did here. So the other thing, costs for IVR and SMS were an awful lot lower than address-based sampling. Now, these, and I should point out, as projections. So the question for us is, well, at what point do we see, we know that SMS SMS recruited panelists are retained for a shorter period of time. At what point, as we play this out over time, does it become more expensive than our address-based sample? And the answer is it doesn't. The cost advantages continue up to basically four years post. I've done variations of this looking at the fact that we would need to do more frequent top-ups, and the end result does not change. So in summary, recruitment and profile rates were quite a bit lower, particularly for IVR, but also SMS. SMS appears to exacerbate existing education biases, although again, we've seen, as we do more SMS recruitment in the future, we'll probably get a better handle on this. Retention and completion rates are certainly lower with SMS, and our best attempts to reverse those were unfortunately a failure. Positive, so cost is an awful lot less, so that's really good. And the sample is younger as well. So just to finish up, kind of gazing into the crystal ball, where this leaves us, I think, is we're probably looking at, as we did late last year, using ABS for recruitment for major expansions. A couple of reasons for that. It helps us maintain representation of the offline population, which we really can't do with SMS push to web, of course. People recruited via ABS do stay in the panel for longer, which means it's going to be a bit more predictable for forward planning. We do think that SMS does have a real role to play, probably kind of in top-ups between expansions, basically helping us deal in particular with the fast attrition of younger panelists. And then, so I think I ended on this point last year, but again, sort of what is the right trade-off between, having good, well, as good as possible in these days, headline response rates, a good sample profile with respect to demographics, and low cost to clients is unclear, and as always would welcome your thoughts. And thank you very much, and contact information if you want further information. So thank you, and I will stop screen sharing now.
Thank you, Ben, that's great.